Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome back to the day 2 afternoon section. So I hope you enjoy your quick lunch. This year we have a shorter lunch break as we hear your voice last year's. So hopefully you can enjoy the talk during your lunch as well. Okay, so in the afternoon section, we are happy to have Jeremy. So he is the product management lead API at DocuSign. So I believe some of you should also have used DocuSign before. So let's hear from him to talk about how API for scaling enterprise and setting the API standards. So can you hear me well?
Can you hear you?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, your voice is loud and clear. So I pass the stage to
Great.
you. So thanks for your time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Patrick, and thank you all. How do you still ensure that solid developer experience? And what are the latest and greatest tools that make this easier through automation? First, I'm going to just go through my most hated slide of any presentation I give with API Days, and that's where I have to talk about myself, but you already got the basic intro. I'm currently working at DocuSign. I'm part of the developer experience team, one of many folk who are working on APIs here at DocuSign. In the past, I've worked at Box, that's what I'm most well known for, but also Tradeshift. That's the other billion-dollar company I'm allowed to talk about. I was early at these companies and helped them to really get their APIs going. So I've seen API initiatives in many places, in enterprise software, in education software, even in drones in the space industry as a consultant. I've also been an advisor to many startups through the Salesforce Accelerator, Alchemist Accelerator, and HeavyBit. So I've worked with many companies on getting their APIs launched. I've worked with many companies they've integrated with other platforms. And I watch companies grow and struggle, grow and succeed with their APIs, and then have challenges as they get to the next stage when they're really expanding and having many teams build out many APIs. That's what I want to get to today. But first, I have to set a little bit of base context for the principles of API design that I want to apply and the tools around that. Although we are focused today, again, more on API governance and API standardization at a larger enterprise. But I first have to make sure we're on the same page on the basic principles of designing an API. And what I like to highlight here is how, really thanks to the magic of the Open API schema and surrounding initiatives, it really is much easier than it used to be to design, build, and launch APIs with a solid developer experience. Tools built around the Open API allow you to auto-generate your documentation, have a mock server, have API libraries and auto-generated code samples. It even helps with API monitoring. And with all these tools around Open API, it's certainly much easier to provide a good developer experience. But it's also easier to even build APIs. One of the first tools that came out with the Open API and Swagger before that was the means of actually auto-generating an Open API schema off of a database schema, and basically auto-generate a REST API off of your database. Now, I'm one who advocates the use of all these tools, but still a different approach to automation when it comes to API designs. This isn't about auto-generating APIs from a database, but using these tools for what many of us know as design first principles for APIs. Or as I also like to say, applying the product management process to APIs. That's basically establishing the points of value for your platform first. Is this about growth? Is this about retention? Are you providing a feature benefit to partners? Are you enabling partners to enhance your functionality? And then from there, figuring out what are the kind of apps you really expect to be built with your APIs. Once you establish that, actually planning the APIs, designing the APIs that make it as easy as possible for your developer community to actually build those sort of apps that you expect. So there's a process here of understanding your developers, understanding their use cases, and then designing according to those use cases. And the tools around Open API today help to automate this process as well. We have the IDEs, Open API editors, to help you design your API and test those designs before you build your APIs at all. And then when you're ready to launch, have that auto-generated documentation, but also an API gateway that helps you with implementation, helps with post-launch monitoring. So there's tooling around this to automate the design-first APIs. And I really emphasize the importance of design-first APIs in enabling then higher quality APIs that are going to achieve that real product market fit, where you have that successful community of developers who are excited to use your APIs. But today we're going to talk about the next challenge. Let's say you have well-designed APIs and a really nice process of getting more APIs to market, all of which are a good fit for your developers. But then you've expanded. You have multiple teams building APIs. What happens then? Well, even if you're applying these great design principles, those design-first principles to your APIs, you're still going to run into this challenge of API consistency. Individual teams may launch high-quality APIs all at the same high quality with that product market fit, that design-first mentality, but those APIs won't naturally work together. And then as a developer, if I start building with one set of your APIs, but then I want to work with APIs from another product you've recently launched, I'm going to find differences in the way I have to authenticate, the scopes and permissions, or I'll find that the responses of some APIs are just a little bit different from what I'm expecting in another set of APIs. But then that means that I can't just take the output of one API and use as the input for another API. Data transformation then becomes necessary. And so my code is going to be much longer. There's going to be much more code. It's going to be more convoluted. It's going to be more error prone. So this is where we see that designing APIs for scale, it requires more than just designing APIs for good usability. So what do you do to avoid the situation where APIs, no matter how good, well-designed, well-intended the teams are, they will start to get naturally disjoint? This problem's been around for well over a decade. I have seen larger tech companies like Google take this on. Years ago, I got to work with Google Workspace, then Google Apps, and I watched how when connecting Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, they actually had different ways of interacting with their documents. This is because the Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides were actually a consequence of 3 different acquisitions. There were 3 separate startups that Google acquired, and initially their APIs were actually very different. But the Google Workspace team figured out how to create a layer and establish better consistency across that product line. And Google in general started to work on a better solution for how to get all of their teams to have a more consistent API experience. And in recent years, this problem has become more prevalent. Basically, we've seen this surge around the same time that COVID started, where many billion-dollar tech companies had suddenly become $10 billion tech companies. And yes, this market graph is a few months old. Many of those tech companies dipped dramatically since then. Hey, I'm at one of them. DocuSign did very well, and our APIs are doing great. But yeah, we have had this challenge with the market. But regardless of the market, we still have gone from being small companies with one team building APIs to a larger company with multiple teams working on APIs for different products. And this has really exacerbated in the last 3 years, where many, many tech companies are running into this challenge. And so the challenge has gone beyond just designing APIs well. It's about API consistency and establishing a standard within your company for everyone to use. So how do we get to establishing that standard? It really is easier said than done. In practice, I've learned that you can't just have one team defining the APIs and basically defining the APIs for all the other teams, saying we are now defining the APIs for all our products. You need a means by which each of these teams has the autonomy to plan their own APIs, but to still have those APIs aligned with all the other APIs at the company. This basically requires first getting some sort of standard that each team can use. This way the teams can plan their own API, but you can make sure that they're actually building them to a basic set of rules to make our APIs look similar. Now we can define those requirements, and I'll get a little bit today into, we don't have too much time, let's get a little bit today into the means by which you can define those standards. But there's more than just defining the standards. You actually need to get the teams to use them. Just like you can't go and define the APIs for teams and throw the APIs on them, you can't force teams to go by standards. What I've learned in practice is that you have to get the teams to want to go this route, to have API consistency. You can basically make your APIs higher quality by making it easier for all the teams to build APIs, as long as they build APIs according to your standard. And we're getting to tips and tricks as to how to do that. And then finally, one thing to really highlight is the need for these teams to still be in communication, work together, and more importantly, be ready to share plans for APIs. By working together in practice, your APIs will be more consistent. So these are the 3 principles, but it's easier said than done. Let's first talk about getting that API standard going. And I don't want to get too much into this because we only have so much time today. We want to focus more on tooling. But I'll take a moment just to talk about the need for an API council. Basically, just as you can't have one team defining all the APIs for your company at that point, you can't have one team just unilaterally declaring what the API standard should be. API councils traditionally have some sort of representation of engineers, engineering managers, and product managers from any team that's working on a public API. So they all have some say in what the standard ultimately is going to be, and you'll have to work with them and facilitate an API standard. So whatever rules you establish in, say, endpoint definitions, casing, making sure to only use, say, camel case for your endpoints, and snake case for your query parameters, and having specific naming requirements, requirements for strong typing. You can establish all this in the council by initiating discussions and allowing all the teams to provide their feedback, and then establishing the standard in a manner that everyone can still say that they had a say in what the standard's going to be. And once you establish the standard, we can get some fun tools to really help to enforce the standard, or I prefer to say not really enforce, but to make it easier for everyone to build APIs along with that standard. The big one being the linter. I'd say the linter really is the biggest component to supporting your API standard. It's basically going beyond the Open API schema. When you have Open API, you can automatically warn developers that their API designs aren't exactly aligned to the general Open API standard. What if we can take our additional standards or additional requirements set in the council and automatically give a warning or an error if you're not abiding by them? Check to see if your query parameters are in snake case. Check to see if certain properties are visibly not strongly typed. Well, the linter is basically extending that validator. Those tools that check to make sure you have a valid API schema, they can check to make sure you're meeting any additional checks that we want to have. It's a nice way of checking, hey, automatically, are you going by our standards? And these fit in very nicely within CI/CD, within the general pipeline on 2 areas. First, if you're planning a whole new set of APIs, maybe you're using an API editor tool like from Swagger Hub, or my personal favorite, Stoplight, a tool that helps you to edit and design your Open API schema. The linter can actually be baked into these products and basically warn you as you're designing your API, before you build any of it, that your API is not meeting in some way the standard established by the API Council. So this fits nicely in API designer tools, but also can fit right into the CI/CD pipeline. So if you're working with an existing API, you've just added a new endpoint, or you've added some additional optional parameters, well, maybe you've just coded, you haven't worked on the designer, but before that goes live, the linter tool, if applied properly, can just automatically catch and give an error and block, or at least warn developers they need to make a change to their plan before taking the API live. So this is helping teams to plan and to make sure they don't make accidental mistakes in the release of their APIs. It makes the flow easier while also directing you to design your APIs according to the standard. I'm also a big supporter, as we mentioned, the topic of sharing. And so the linter is a big tool, but I really have to say that the most important component is the reusability of the model definitions in your API. Most of our API endpoints are just built around the underlying models in our API schemas. And the biggest risk is that you wind up with a few slightly different API models for very similar but slightly different purposes on different teams. And next thing you know, a developer can use the output of the APIs of one product with the inputs of the API of another product. So really the biggest thing to ensure consistency is to encourage teams to reuse models rather than always define their own. And this can be done by supporting sharing. It's also aided through API designer tools like Swagger Hub and Stoplight, where if teams start to establish certain models that they're using, you can create a central schema of these reusable models and provide an auto-suggest method so that other teams that are planning their API, well, they can see the models that are already in use and just grab one of those before they even try planning a new model. It's making it much easier to plan and implement your API by reusing existing models, and inherently, it makes your APIs more consistent. So I find this can also be done through API editors like what Stoplight has, what Swagger Hub has, or Insomnia, it's owned by Kong. Combining that with the validator, we can even get creative here and have your validator check, hey, did you simulate, are you releasing a new API with an entirely new model? Let's go and take a look and see if this model is similar to any models we've already established within our standard. And we can alert you that maybe you shouldn't make a new model, you should use an existing model. So this is the magic of the API editor tool, sharing models, and then using that validator, applying a linter and other checks to make sure these APIs are meeting your standard. Now, I have to warn, if you're using these sort of tools, you're establishing your standard, you're enforcing your standard, just be prepared for surprises in the design when you're bringing these things into your CI/CD pipeline. Here's the fun thing to be ready for. It is very common to establish standards, and so we also want to be consistent in our API documentation and our SDKs, and maybe you have one centralized team that's facilitating the standards, but then also maintaining that developer site with your documentation, and they're generating the SDKs for you. Now, you'll find that even if the APIs are properly designed according to Open API schema, they're properly designed according to any standards you've established and enforced in a linter, that schema may be totally valid, but suddenly it's not working with your documentation generator, or you're trying to generate code samples or code libraries, and that's not working either. I find it's very common for teams now to use CodeGen or a modified version of CodeGen to generate API libraries. But CodeGen doesn't take any valid OpenAPI schema and generate your library. It has certain little kinks in it, certain extra requirements that you need to be aware of. And you may have to apply that in your linter and your validator and make sure the teams are not just providing a valid API schema, but a schema that is going to work with any down the pipeline tooling when you're creating documentation SDKs. I find it's important to actually communicate it to teams. We're having a general requirement of an Open API schema, Open API standard. We have additional standard requirements to keep our APIs aligned. We have this requirement to please use existing models as much as possible. And we have some extra things you have to put in your definition to make sure that when we're generating the documentation for you, it's going to actually work. So in theory, you can make this very nice, smooth pipeline that enforces everything and still automatically generates your documentation, your libraries. But in practice, you have to be ready for some caveats. It's totally resolvable. Just be ready for them. All right, I'm going to try rushing through the last bits here, but ultimately, you can't talk about tooling without talking about an API gateway. Another common challenge we have when it comes to API standardization is allowing basically, if you let teams have their own infrastructure, you may find that even if each of them is setting up rate limiting and proper enforcement of rate limiting, developers can get around it. You may have a problem with a malicious developer utilizing the fact that you have different infrastructure for different APIs, and rate limiting won't be that easy to enforce unless you have common infrastructure. So I strongly encourage teams to establish an agreement on what API gateway to use. If everyone's on the same API gateway, it's much easier to enforce rate limiting across all your APIs. It's also a lot easier to have analytics set up. I've encountered many situations where your data team, your analytics team, has to create a custom system for API monitoring and data collection for each API. It's a lot more work and it's a lot less reliable than if you have everyone on the same infrastructure, under the same gateway, utilizing the same built-in or third-party analytics tools or data monitoring tools that just work across the board. It makes it much more likely to just work out of the box, work more reliably, and with much less effort. So I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A here. But besides just talking about how with these sort of tools, applying the principles of a standard through the council and setting up a linter to enforce your standards and all the tooling around automation here, what does the future hold as we continue to grow and as we continue to try to make this whole thing smoother for your teams to build even better APIs? I'd say keep a lookout for what's in the market, check some interesting open source solutions, and think out of the box yourself. For instance, I found the Swagger Inflector tool. It helps teams that maybe didn't define their APIs strongly to give them a head start by auto-generating a new version of their open API schema with strongly typed formatting. They can detect, oh, do you have an ID? Okay, well, let's make it, a string of UUID format. They can detect if something should be in date time format and try to strongly type it for you. So just extra creative tools like that. I found a tool, Open API diff, that helps to automatically catch, based on the differences in your open API schema, is there a breaking change? So keep a lookout for these tools you can incorporate into your CI/CD pipeline to better ensure the quality across all the teams working on your API. And also, when it comes to defining your linter to really enforce your standards, I do find there's a bit of a hurdle here in understanding how to create that in a schema. Can we make that easier? It turned out Stoplight already was one step ahead. They've created an interface. You can actually have like a linter builder that'll help you to enforce through an interface. They can help you to create the actual enforcement policies to share within your pipeline. So I'm trying to rush to the last bits here. So I will just emphasize for everyone, set your standards, work across your teams, make this, it's very late by me. I forgot the term, but, don't dictate. Try to create a system by which everyone has their say, facilitate, but through these tools, you can keep coordinated and keep an automated system for consistent, well-designed APIs. All right, I definitely hit a limit here, so thank you for your patience. And if there are any questions here, I think we have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jeremy. So we still have 2 minutes, and I actually see a comment. He asked twice about what is your thought about the JSPSO API mandate. So do you have any supplement to add? I think this is a very popular one. So do you have any supplement to add?
Sorry, I couldn't hear all that. Sorry, can you repeat
Oh,
that?
okay. So there's an audience asking, what is your thoughts about the famous JSPSO's API mandate? Talking about everything should be going through the API interface. Do you have any supplement, because your content is very relevant to that? Yeah.
Yes. So I do see it as a slightly different topic, but is one that I support. Jeff Bezos, I think, is more the APIs first principles. That's like everything we build should be built on top of APIs. Overall, I think it's a good thing, but it's not everything. I've seen companies that are APIs first, eat your own dog food. They apply RESTful design principles, and yet their APIs actually end up not being a fit for their developer community, because there is a difference between APIs first and design first. They go together, but just because your APIs first doesn't mean your design first. And so I have other talks on that topic. This talk really assumed that you're applying ideally APIs first, but to me, most importantly, regardless, design first principles. You're designing, you're making sure that your APIs are designed according to validated use cases, or what developers in the external community are actually trying to do.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for your response to the audience. So I think the time is almost up. So thanks once again for your sharing. So thanks for your support to API Days Hong Kong. Okay, see you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Okay, so thanks, Jeremy, to talk about how to apply the API standard for the scale. So in the next section, we are talking about how the digital transformation facing in the API and also the potentially pitfall progression and also the PET. So we are now having Sona from Estate to talk about that. So can you hear me well?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, good. The voice is loud and clear. So I can see your slide as well. So I pass the stage to you. So thank you.
Right, great. Thanks a lot, Patrick. Hi, I'm Sonal. I'm the CTO and co-founder of X8. And essentially what we do is, and what our vision is to be the trusted and secure access of data. That's what our global vision is, to be that standard across the board. A bit about my background before I kick in, to be fair. Prior to setting up X8, I was the head of digital assets at HSBC. And one of the things that, a lot of the learnings that we see and the things that I'm going to be covering in this presentation has been predominantly around some of the challenges I had in a corporate environment. Anything that came to access of data, being able to do any cross-border data transfers, trying to create any global solutions. Software wasn't actually the issue. It was all the controls, it was all the issues around it. And we've ended up having to create a solution around how do we actually manage some of these requirements. You're always going to have different people from different jurisdictions that will say that they're the experts. So how do you manage all of that when it comes to releasing software, releasing APIs, and so some of those other challenges that will come with it? And I'll talk through it as we go through this presentation. So one of the main things that we do see is that API data security is now going to be a key focus for many organizations, if not all, considering 91% of organizations have had some sort of security breach with their APIs already, and 85% having multiple. It's a multi-million-dollar security instance now. So, and I'm going to cover what are the pitfalls when you get it wrong, and what could you do to potentially make it right. It's a bit of a shocking number there, but by 2025 we're looking at that almost 50% of APIs will not be managed. It does mean that we're just putting more and more risk in. But what happens when you've got that risk? What happens to the people around you? What happens to your organization? And especially what it looks like particularly in the region. And one of the key things that we're seeing is it's not just about what access you're giving to data and how do you promote those things around reusability, but privacy will be that differentiator that's going to help you. If you build it in, you build those controls in correctly, you're going to be able to not only reuse your APIs, but we're going to be looking at how you can easily manage your estate where it comes to being able to manage that the access and what privacy you need to be applying to it. So as I was saying, it's going to be a key focus for many organizations. It was quite interesting to actually see Samsung's advert at the moment, where privacy is that differentiator for them. They are advertising that your privacy is first. Apple's just come up with another update, and everything's around what privacy settings that you got, what can Safari see, all of those things. So we're seeing privacy becoming more and more a part of everything that we're seeing today. So going back to APIs, and we want to talk about what are the potential pitfalls. APIs have been amazing. What we've been able to do, and going back to Patrick's point before, with Jeff Bezos saying, be API first, always think about that service-based architecture, always think about every single service that you're having that's going to be external facing. So if you're building with those sort of things in your mindset, so what do you need to do to make it external? What do you need to be able to do? But APIs, they've been this solution to a massive problem that we had in terms of digital, but it has come with its own challenges. One is Gartners are now saying that APIs are the most frequent attack vector. And secondly, as I was mentioning, 91% of organizations have had some sort of security incident. And overall, these micro conditions that are driving privacy are going to be around those breaches. But there is that regulatory risk. 80%, that's 2/3 of the world's population, will have some sort of data protection regulation around it over the course of by the end of next year. So that's a huge number. We're talking about 2/3 of the population are going to be covered by this, and they've got rights as individuals to be able to ensure that their data is safe. Secondly, is that digital risk. We've built software at a pace that we've never seen before, and it's always worth taking a step back to see, well, what's actually happened? What have we had to roll out when we're working from home? All of those sides of it. But what if we're rolling out software at that sort of pace? What controls have had to be loosened? What happened and what risk are we sitting on? And then finally, it's that 87% of us have said we will not deal with companies that we don't trust how they're dealing with our data. And that's a huge number. That if you think that someone is not going to deal with you because they're concerned about your security practices, that's something that's worth having in as a part of your governance structure to make sure that you don't actually hit that, and you're not your organization is not being faced with those sort of challenges. And the importance of that has now led to 94% of companies now providing privacy metrics to their board. So we can't actually cover this without actually saying what's going on in the region. And overall, we know that the privacy regulation within Hong Kong is, or the personal data regulations around it have got 6 main core principles that we are looking out for, and these are like common, very standard across what we're seeing across the rest of the globe. But there are some like slight nuances, and there are definitely things around, especially with China, around data localization and what do you need to do to be able to comply with personal data and it's not only personal data. If we're dealing with financial data, and we are, so a big part of, I understand a lot of the audience are from financial backgrounds, insurance backgrounds, those sort of organizations. Yeah, we know that you also have got additional regulations that you need to be looking at. There are additional controls that you need to look at, and the consequences of getting it wrong are pretty high. So like looking at the 6 principles that they discussed. So it is about the purpose and manner of what you're collecting personal data. I'll cover, example, what happened with Twitter when they collected information for multi-factor authentication, and what were the consequences of getting that wrong. So you're only, and so when we're thinking about it from an API perspective, when we're saying what are we collecting this personal data for, we always think about, well, what information is access control, what information are we actually putting out there? This is the reverse as well. So what information are you actually collecting? What are you actually bringing in? What is if you're looking at open banking, for example, do you need social security numbers and all of that really sensitive information about an individual before you actually put that in your database? Or like more importantly, and one of the pitfalls around it is putting that information in log files. So taking that payload, putting it into a log file in a unencrypted form, and having anybody to have access to it. That is where it starts getting really sketchy, when you need to be making sure that you've got those controls in place. The accuracy and the duration of retention, that is a common one. How long are you keeping the information for? You make sure you don't keep it for longer than you need to. And the use of that personal data, all personal data will be, the way that you're using it for the purpose that you're saying you're using it for. Data security, so you're making sure now this is one of the interesting ones, and there's a lot of debate around what is the right privacy enhancing technique to use when you're looking at it. Is encryption good enough? Do you need to pseudonymize it? Do you need to do any other types of things? When we are looking at data, like things like encryption, if you've had the pleasure of reading any of these regulations, encryption is deemed still to be personal data. So when you're talking about sending information across borders, when you've still got data that's in its encrypted form, that's still personal. As you may still be caught out. You can't just send information out to a different jurisdiction. You might need something completely different to make sure that data is at rest and stored in data within that jurisdiction. So there are a lot of different things, and we do understand that not every developer can be an expert in every single privacy enhancing technique, but there is software out there, especially like companies like ours, that will help you and already give you the tools to be able to do that very, very easy. The openness and transparency. So people do want to know what data you're holding about them, what the policies and practices are around that. So we have like every single website that you've probably been to will say, this is what we're collecting your information for. Nobody wants to trawl through it, but trying to make that into easy, simple language about what are you actually doing with it, how you're handling it, how you're protecting it. All of that becomes more and more important as the regulations are telling you to do. It is the law. And access and correctness. So this is, it is one that's near and dear to my heart, is who's accessing what. Are we applying principles of least privilege? Are we holding any sort of data or that we shouldn't be? And if the individual asks for access around who's been looking at my data, what have they been doing with it, what information do you have on me, you should be able to give that information back out to the individuals. And those are the 6 main core principles that you've got. Just having a quick look at the privacy regulation at a glance. Significant amendments were made in 1996, where in 2012, where the key focus was around marketing regulation and how are you using that information. We are constantly, if you speak to other types of consultancies around this, it's all about hyper-personalization. But to do those sort of things, you need to be able to access that data, but make sure you're doing it in a lawful manner. There was further amendments in 2021. And it was a term I'd never heard before. It was around doxing. So everything was around this Doxing Act. This is about what information are you collecting and how are you targeting individuals, and are you putting information on like search engines, social media platforms, all of those. If you put information about an individual in a public domain, what are the consequences of doing that? So it's an interesting one, because I've not seen that in so much in other regulations just yet, but it's very, very interesting that they are doing more and more around this space. We can't just focus on like the Hong Kong laws, because the cybersecurity laws that are coming from China are incredibly tough as well, and some of the fines that have come with that have been extremely high. So we'll just cover it at a bit of a glance. But when we're seeking to protect personal information, it's when we're looking at any sort of information that we're collecting on Chinese individuals, it's worth understanding behind it. But what was the goal behind it? What are they trying to achieve by it? So they're a big part of it has been around what information can be shared outside of China. First and foremost, we know that there's a lot of things around state-backed attacks. To China, to protect it, has said we're going to keep information within China. So that becomes incredibly difficult. So while I was at HSBC, that was a huge issue for us in what we can and can't do with information. Trying to get information to create global solutions that help relationship managers around what their clients are doing to benefit from global systems that we've already created was near impossible. So we had to always release softwares, set up teams within those jurisdictions. But are there any other techniques that we could be using that could help promote some of that global use? And as we are looking at APIs, we are trying to do things like create one customer view. We are trying to create one transaction view. But with some of the pitfalls with regulation, it becomes more and more challenging, and you have to be more and more creative on how you're going to actually create these global systems. And typically the answer's always been, why don't we just create another API that's just for China and have that all of those rules around it? But that becomes maintenance. We do recognize, again, from a development perspective, everyone loves absolutely love to write software. Maintaining software, not so much. So again, what kind of things can you be adding into your CI/CD pipeline? What kind of things can you be doing around continual testing to make sure that you're not falling foul of any of these regulations? I'm going to try and get through this a little bit faster now because I'm mindful of time. When we think of financial services, we do have, again, that localized processing of financial information. And when investigations do happen around in more regulated industries, you can see that this potentially has got really massive pitfalls for it. So Didi was fined at 8 billion yuan. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. But there were around 3 major laws concerning cybersecurity, data security, and personal information protection. The latter of the two were only brought into effect after the CAC began its investigations around it. And what was interesting about it is that it was the company's chairman and executives were all individually fined. They are taking this very, very seriously. So when the impact is, it's not just about what your organization is, what fine it's been doing. So when you talk about things like Twitter, it's just a drop in the ocean. These are personal fines that people are getting right now. So yeah, we like going back now talking about Twitter, that this is probably one of the most interesting things that I've seen. And this is all about what are you using that information for? So all well and good that we've got we've got firewalls built in, all of those things, but what happens when you actually misuse data by accident? And everyone could see how this could potentially happen. So Twitter was fined $150 million. And this was because they collected users' phone numbers for multi-factor authentication. But what they ended up doing is someone found those numbers and said, oh, wouldn't it be great to market to these individuals by text? And that was breaking the law. That was the information, it wasn't tagged with any sort of metadata to say why this information was collected to start with. And then it was used in an incorrect manner. This violated both EU and US laws. So just getting back to what the potential pitfalls were around my corporate roles around APIs and the journey that we had. It was great when we first started. We had a gateway, we had a producer, we had a consumer, and it was wonderful. I had full visibility. All of the different teams had different visibility on what information was traveling between where. So with the consumer, we know about the consumer, we know about the producer. But when it starts getting a challenge is when it becomes really, really popular and we start losing visibility. So as I was saying, you'll end up with a multiple customer object. You'll have a China customer object. You'll have a US customer object. And we're kind of moving away from those design practices that we wanted to have initially, was where we've got one customer object or we've got one account object, and we're able to reuse those information, have those defined contracts, and deal with and be able to give that information. And then we lose sight of that. So we start building discovery services, and we build that service mesh. So we've got machines finding other APIs, we've got services finding other services. It becomes really, really difficult to manage. And if you were to do that again, what kind of things? So this is what from our experience as a company. If we were to do this again, what controls would we have put into place? And what we're looking to hear is for the gateways to solve some of those issues. What we would have done is made sure from the beginning that we had security and privacy patterns built into our gateways. And when we're talking about those privacy controls, we want to set these patterns to simplify and reuse. And we're just setting that pattern to start with to promote that reusability. Just quickly to get through the rest of it. We are, as a company, we don't think that once you've done this protection, you can get away with not, as we're evolving, as we're asking more and more requirements, what can we do to continually test this? So this is the types of patterns that we're looking at putting into our gateways. So first is you always locate and classify what your API traffic is. And then we've got tooling within our set to analyze and learn about what are those risks, what are we breaking. It's not just about different data regulations. It is within financial regulations, all of those things, and start learning and building models about what risks are we actually posing by adding that new attribute. With our platform, we can immediately solve those. So we can automatically set it to say, actually, we want to be protecting this information. Not everyone should have that role-based access or that the old ways of being able to do it. We look at attribute-based access, so we can look at individual bits about the data in context and say, can we solve this automatically? And then, of course, we have to continually be testing this. We know this is an evolving landscape, and we should be looking at ensuring that we're continually testing and that the cycle goes on. The gateways are doing much, much more to enable data in motion. So we are looking at things like gRPC, etc. Gateways are, from calling it an API gateway, we're just looking at gateways now because they are doing so much more. And there is a lot that we could be doing more to put these governance patterns in all of these technologies. But overall, we need to be protecting data everywhere. If we look at the way our data assets are, we're not only consuming information from APIs, we are connecting directly to data sources, we're connecting to data virtualization tools, and we need to be thinking about what pattern could we be putting across our architecture in general, what interfaces are we using to connect to that information, and how many entitlement systems do we have? Are we able to look at creating a common way that we can take entitlements from many different places and be able to start enforcing that on data in a consistent manner? So with that, I will wrap up and to see if there's any questions.
Hello, Sonia. So thanks for your sharing. So I would like to ask a bit of the question. So you mentioned that you propose that there will be an API gateway. There's a layer between the API gateway for the data governance. So you also mentioned about the Hong Kong DPDO, the China cybersecurity rule. So how exactly your thoughts is? For example, this rule, is it we need to implement ourselves, or how we can handle that? Because this may be changed, sometimes it may be very sharp or solid. Do you have any quick supplement on that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So that big part of what we're looking to do is take some of those challenges away, because we are in an evolving landscape. We can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year down the line. So to build that into individual services is becoming more and more of a challenge, or expecting the back ends to even know who the consumer is even more so challenging. So we can look to the gateways to say, actually, the gateways, so we're not looking to be a proxy, we're not looking to be any network sniffing or any of those sort of tools, but gateways themselves can provide a lot of that service. We know about the consumer, we know about that data. So you could create central services that are looking and overlaying security and those privacy at that layer. And that's technology like ours that will sit there and allow you to say, it's raining on a Thursday and Patrick's wearing green socks. He's not allowed to see that data. If something like that happens, and that's the new regulation that comes into effect, you don't want to be writing that in every single service. So what we're enabling you to do is manage that centrally, and then as the data is flowing through, we can immediately solve for that and put those rules in without actually having to make any code changes to existing services.
So the actually, when the data transfer, you actually need to look into the payload so that you know what is inside. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yes. So we look at the information that's actually going through it. We look at the schema. We look at the actual data that's going through as well to say that this data belongs to Patrick. Patrick's a VIP. We need to treat his data a little bit differently versus Joe Bloggs, who is a regular guy. We don't need to be as precautious with him. So we're able to put, it's not just about the schema that we need to be looking at. It's that data in context as well. So has Patrick consented for that sort of data use? Those sort of things we can start applying immediately, just looking at payloads without actually having to know what the service is doing behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think this kind of discussion is also quite hot in Hong Kong, especially the data protections, how we can not only in the open banking but also maybe in healthcare, etc. There are lots of discussions about the data sharing. So I think maybe due to the time is quite limited. If the audience is interested to know more, we can reach out Sona offline. Maybe I will also try to reach out Sona offline because I want to understand better how it practically work, especially you need to tap into the payload, how it impact the performance, how we need to govern the control, etc. So I think this is an interesting concept, and then we want to drill into that later. Okay, so thanks, Son, for your sharing. So yeah, thanks for your support again. Okay, so see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, thanks, Sona. Okay, so so in our next sections, we have Derek from Mosif, Mosif, and then he will be talking about the best practice when monetize the API. So Derek, can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, yeah, your voice is also good, and I see your slide as well. So I pass the time to you. So, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Patrick, and happy to be here at API Days Hong Kong. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to monetize APIs and some of the best practices we've seen as we've worked with different companies. A little bit about myself. I'm the CEO of Mosif. We're the leading API analytics and monetization platform, and I love to focus on API-first strategy, growth of API products, and product-led growth strategies. And a little known fact is I do love IPAs, so it's a little late here in San Francisco, but you know, if it was on a Friday, I might be at the local bar drinking an IPA. So why is it that selling to developers is so hard? You know, selling to developers is drastically different than it was 10 years ago when we think about selling enterprise software. 10 years ago, you know, probably were building out a large field sales team and selling right on site. And you're probably likely talking to the C-suite or VP of sales or VP of engineering or CISO or whoever it is that you're selling to. These days, the way that enterprise software is bought is very decentralized, and individual developers have a lot more autonomy than they used to. All you need is a senior developer to discover API, integrate it, maybe in a test environment, and before you know it, they actually are championing that type of software technology throughout the organization and pushing their management team to actually buy that piece of software. The other thing that makes it very challenging is that a lot of these different APIs and technologies can be built internally, or you can adopt open source software. So how do you actually punch above, you know, all these different technologies and try and make sure that your solution, your API is actually discoverable and can be adopted? And so, you know, this is going against a lot of these things around not invented here syndrome. Developers can build it themselves. So how do you make sure that you can actually sell to developers? But the other tricky thing that people have to keep in mind is not just up to developers themselves when they make a buy decision. You have legal and security review, you have procurement processes, you know, for example, compliance risk. Is this piece of software SOC 2 compliant? Does it comply with HIPAA compliance? There's a lot of different things that a developer has to get buy-in from different stakeholders before that piece of software can be pushed out to production. Now, the tricky thing with APIs is a lot of times it is touching production data, and that's actually what makes a lot of these processes even more complex than buying a piece of software for, say, you know, the HR team or other different areas of the company. So one way you can actually circumvent a lot of these problems is by landing developers first. And what you're doing here is trying to get a developer to pay a token amount. Maybe it's $50 a month, maybe it's $100 a month, but it's something that's very small and just gets them started so they can see value in the initial API. And whether that's just in a staging environment, maybe they're kicking the tires a little bit, they're just trying to play around with the API and see, does this fit my needs? And is something that I should spend more time to investigate, due diligence on, and then present to my management team. And another way to actually get around this stuff is by trying to reduce and remove a lot of these blockers that we usually see when you're adopting enterprise software. So for example, instead of dealing with legal and security review, why not just have a click-through terms of service? A developer can go to your website, sign up for your service, go through a self-service onboarding flow, and choose a plan automatically without any sales involved up until that point. In addition, having a very simple and fast integration process. So that, installing their SDK or getting started with the API is more of a matter of 10 or 15 minutes rather than trying to plan out a 6-month pilot period with a very, very lengthy and a lot of different stakeholders involved to roll that out. The other big piece is just having the ability to leverage a manager's credit card. That way, the developer does not need to go to procurement before they can actually start paying for your API service. Now, the tricky thing here is this is not the end game, right? This is just a way for a developer to start seeing value in your API, get them to recognize and get them to see that aha moment before they're actually chatting with their stakeholders and management team and putting their own credibility on the line to say, this is the solution that we need at the organization. And so when we think about selling to developers, you're actually selling through developers. And you're leveraging these developers who already are using the API, testing it out, and getting to leadership to sell something else besides the API. So for example, it might be certain enterprise requirements. And this might mean, meeting compliance requirements, single sign-on, maybe it's around data privacy and security. It could also mean a higher levels of usage, right? So a single developer might just be testing this in a staging environment where they're at a very low volume, but once this is rolled out to production, that volume could drastically increase, and it could be at a pretty rapid clip. The other thing is other teams, use cases, adding things like advanced analytics or reporting for the leadership team to understand and make sure they're getting the best ROI out of the API platform. Now, what does this mean for sales teams? It actually means sales is getting engaged at a much later stage than what we've usually seen for enterprise software. At the point that a sales team is getting engaged, the customer might have already integrated, they might be paying a token amount, they've already seen value in the platform, and they actually probably have played around with it quite a bit. So you're leveraging these developers as a champion, and you're actually trying to reach and make sure you're able to get their leadership team on board. And so at the point that sales is getting engaged, it's actually growing usage, and it's more of an expansion play rather than trying to go from 0 to 1, which can be really hard when you're selling to a technical audience. Now, other thing to keep in mind is you're actually trying to be consultative. How do you help the organization get more value out of the API? Whether it's additional use cases, it could be professional services, it could be additional features and such. And how do you help them meet certain requirements and meet the goals that they have? Now, the tricky thing is each API business is drastically different. And so today I'm going to walk through some of these different decisions that you have to make when you think about monetizing an API. And when I say monetizing an API, that means you're a relatively API-first organization, and you might be selling the API directly to developers. And so some of the things I'm going to talk about is prepaid versus postpaid billing. Should you set up your pricing as a tiered pricing structure versus more of a pay-as-you-go model? When do you actually invoice an organization? And how do you actually set up different support tiers? So let's first talk about prepaid versus postpaid billing. So anyone that's had a cell phone, in the last decade, you know that you can buy a burner phone and you actually just put on $50 worth of credits. That's the prepaid billing model. Or you can actually set up a phone bill, and after your monthly usage is done, you pay that bill, and then you might have a $50 a month bill or whatever that is for your phone. And so there's pluses and minuses to each of these billing strategies that I'm listing here. On the prepaid side, this is something that a lot of enterprise organizations are already familiar with, especially if they've been buying enterprise software for quite some time. You usually buy the software before you ever actually see any value out of it. It's also better cash flow for your business, right? Because if you're buying a year up front, or maybe it's even beyond that, you're already able to bring in that revenue before you had to service the API. Now, the tricky thing here, though, is going to be harder for developers to onboard with your API, especially because now you're asking them to commit dollars before they've seen that much value in the API itself. And it can be also harder with pay-as-you-go, especially if you want to implement some type of usage-based model. how do you actually implement a prepaid billing model when you don't even know what the usage level is like, right? So now a developer, as I'm signing up for this a new API, I don't know if I should buy 1,000 widgets or 100 million widgets because I haven't even implemented that yet. And so when we go to the post-pay billing model, this is where we can actually drastically reduce the onboarding friction, right? Because they can actually get started and start using the API before they even committed any dollars to your company. And it also makes pay-as-you-go much easier because now, you know, it's whatever the last month is, or however you design that pay-as-you-go model. You know, they don't need to think about how many widgets they need to buy before they start playing with the API. Now, one of the tricky things here is there could be additional credit risk. So if your API is very expensive to serve, right, and you have a lot of vendors you depend on in order for that API to be reliable and usable, then that could be dangerous for the business. Because what happens if a developer, you know, signs up for maybe it's 100 free accounts with 100 different emails, or they don't actually pay with a credit card, but then you actually have a large bill outstanding. So that's one thing to keep in mind with this prepaid versus postpaid billing concept. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is packaging strategy. And the tiered pricing model, which is on the left side here, that's something we've seen with traditional SaaS companies. You know, you have the good, better, best plan. And it's a nice way to reduce the number of different decisions or mental decision making that a developer has to make as you're looking at your pricing page. There's only 3 options typically, right? And so they start with a smaller plan and they naturally will upgrade their plan as needed. And the nice thing here with the tiered pricing is it enforces minimum spend. So if your support costs are very high, and it'll be very hard for the unit economics to work out if a developer is paying 5 cents a month for your API, then a tiered pricing model might be able to help with that side. It's also very easy to implement. You don't have to deal as much with tracking transaction volume or usage-based pricing and stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. That could be very hard to roll out. And so a lot of times people like to start with the tiered pricing before they move to a pay-as-you-go model. Now, one of the tricky things though with tiered pricing is to be very rigid. And what I mean by that is you're going to have a developer that's on your lowest paid plan and they're paying $100 a month because they see $200 a month in value out of your API. But then let's say your next tier is $500. And then they go from $200 to maybe seeing $300 in value from the API. Now what's happening is there's a gap, right? They see $300 of value, but your next tier is $500 in value or $500 in cost, so they don't upgrade and they get stuck. And so trying to figure out where the paywalls make sense, how to make sure you can push people to that next tier, that can be very difficult. And that's where the pay-as-you-go model can be extremely beneficial for your organization, because now you're taking away all the friction around expansion. It's a very natural process. They stayed out, a developer will start off paying 5 cents or $10 a month, and naturally will grow as that volume or usage or whatever metric you're metering on increases over time. So this allows you to truly grow with your customers. Now, one of the hard things to deal with though with a pay-as-you-go model is dealing with billing surprises, right? You don't want a developer to put down their credit card. 1 week they were paying $10 a month, and the next week suddenly it skyrockets to $10,000 a month. How do you deal with those type of surprises, and how do you manage expectations? And that can be a very complex thing. It requires a certain level of expertise around customer success and support, and the right analytics and metering to ensure you can reach out and make sure they don't have those surprises, which can be very upsetting for a developer as they're trying out new software. The third piece I'm going to talk about is invoicing strategy. And there's two different things that you can, or two different approaches you can take here. On the left side is recurring, which is usually per month or maybe it's per quarter, per year. There's some type of periodic schedule that the organization will receive their invoice. And this is pretty common with SaaS companies and allows you to layer in even usage-based. For example, you can look at the usage for the last month and then send the organization an invoice for whatever the last month's usage is worth. It's much easier for finance teams to deal with, because now you can align that to per month, per quarter when it comes to things like GAAP accounting and revenue recognition. It's also a lot more predictable for both yourself and the company that's buying from you. However, one of the hard things is it could have very bad unit economics, especially for very, very low cost SaaS solutions or very low cost API solutions. What I mean by that is what happens if you do have that developer that's paying 5 cents a month because they're using, say, S3. Does it make sense to actually send them an invoice every single month for 5 cents worth of transactions? And that's where we see things like a threshold-based invoicing can actually be very beneficial. This was used quite heavily within the ad industry, where you're reaching something of a threshold. Maybe it's like $500, and then you send out the invoice, or it's $1,000 and you send out the invoice. It doesn't really matter where they are within their billing period. They could have 3 invoices 1 month, and then the next month it's almost 0 invoices. And this could actually be beneficial when your API has very, very different volume requirements for customers depending on the month. 1 month they might be using a lot, but the next month it might be very low, right? And that way you can make sure that you're not extending too much credit by having a lot of the outstanding bill and you haven't collected yet. However, one of the tricky things here is it can be very hard for the finance team to actually deal with these very ad hoc invoices. You're actually could be increasing company liability, especially if you implement a prepaid billing model. What I mean by that with prepaid and threshold-based billing and invoicing is you're actually buying as a customer a certain number of credits. Maybe I recharge my gift card or whatever you want to call it with $50, and now that has to be considered in terms of the balance sheet of the company, right? How do you deal with those credits that could be outstanding but not used yet? The last thing I'm going to talk about is value metrics. And so trying to figure out what is the right thing to actually meter on and invoice customers on, that can be very tricky, right? Because if you choose one metric, it might not be aligned to the actual value a customer receives. And so I've outlined 5 different metrics here. The first is transaction volume. We've seen this a lot within different analytics companies, messaging companies, chat APIs, where you're literally tracking the number of messages sent through the platform. The second here is a revenue share or cost share model. Stripe is one of the popular companies that leverage this, where as a lot of people know, is 2.9%, or maybe you can negotiate a better rate. Don't kill me if I said that. The third here is data volume. We see this a lot within log management. Some of the infrastructure companies recharging based off of the actual volume itself in terms of gigabytes. This could be also things like minutes consumed or minutes sent or transcribed. The last 2 here is user-centric, which we see a lot within any type of customer-facing tool. So this would be things like Segment, where they track monthly tracked users or monthly unique users for the month. And the last is resource-based. And these are things like compute hours. It could be maybe machine hours or something like that. We see this a lot within infrastructure companies, cloud vendors. We're literally paying per hour per compute unit or something along those lines. But the tricky thing, whatever metric you're deciding, it has to be aligned to customer value. What I mean by that is, let's say your API is an email API that handles sending out emails to generate new leads or something like that. And you could choose 2 different metrics. One metric would be the number of email templates or HTML templates inside the platform. And the other metric you could choose is, let's say, number of emails sent through the platform. Well, let's say you actually wrote out the first pricing strategy, which is the number of email templates. And we're going to say it's $1 for 1 email template and $100 for 100 email templates stored in the platform. Well, the problem there is, what if someone starts setting up your API, they never ever send a single email, but they did store 1,000 templates for a lot of different use cases that they envisioned, but they never were able to get around to sending out those emails. Now they have this $1,000 a month bill, but they never were able to send out a single email, which their initial goal was to actually outreach to their customers, or maybe to new leads or something else. So if you choose a different metric, such as a number of emails sent, or maybe it's a number of different email contacts reached, that is a lot more closer aligned to the value that the organization receives. And so that's why we strongly recommend thinking about what is a true value a customer gets before deciding what you to charge on. Now, one of the tricky things though, with all the stuff I just discussed is how do you actually scale account management and support? Because it's one thing when you're dealing with a small group of enterprise customers, but when you start rolling out, usage-based pricing and self-service adoption or bottoms-up adoption, then you have to actually start managing the needs of hundreds of thousands of different developers, each with different needs at the same time. And so you're going to see issues during onboarding. You're going to see 400 errors or 500 errors on the API, SDK issues. You can see changing business needs. Initially, maybe it was just a couple of developers playing around with the API, but suddenly they need separate reporting for management to see. And then again, the billing surprises that I mentioned, how do you actually manage those expectations and make sure organizations are aware of what the usage is and what the billing will look like. And so the easiest way to do this is by adding as much of this admin and operation stuff into your customer-facing portals and apps as much as possible. So for example, for managing billing and usage, you should have the capability for developers and their management team to log in and see exactly what their usage is trending, what their bill is going to be for the next month, and also allow them to play around with the data so they can see what can they optimize or what can they, what is the ROI they're getting, and if they need to optimize something on the API, they can do so. So providing those tools for them to self-admin and rectify these type of situations, that can go a long way for improving your developer experience. Similarly, send out automated notifications at the right trigger points. So for example, if someone increases their usage by 50% in a week, make sure you have a system in place that will automatically notify those accounts and those organizations. Just let them know, hey, your usage has increased quite a bit. Maybe it makes sense for you to either upgrade your plan, talk to someone from our customer success or support department, and we can figure out what makes sense based off of your changing requirements. And so what we usually recommend in this case is you're going to actually have some automation for maybe some of these self-service customers, but you still want to have some of that higher touch outreach for folks who, maybe they're on a higher support plan or they're on some type of contract where they, deserve and expect, that higher touch process. But making sure you have both is extremely important, especially when you're managing some type of API product and trying to make sure you can drive growth. The other thing that you can actually leverage is some of these different marketplaces that are available for you. Things like Amazon Marketplace, Microsoft Azure, they all have ways for them to integrate your API, but also start paying for your solution as a line item on their AWS bill that they already probably have. And some of the benefits with this is it actually allows you to actually sell your API faster, because now they don't even have to deal with the manager's credit card. You also don't have to deal with issues where the manager leaves the organization now that credit card is expired, and it's already actually set up almost as an enterprise agreement without actually going through all the steps that you would normally need to actually set that up. Lastly, the big thing to look at is how do you leverage both qualitative and quantitative feedback. It's one thing when you're dealing with 20, 50, 100 accounts, we can easily just chat with those folks, understand where they're struggling, why are they not able to adopt the API, what issues are they running into. But when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of developers, each with different experience levels and such, you really need to take a metrics-driven approach to understand where developers drop off. And what I'm showing here is a 4-step funnel. And this is what we usually recommend for any type of API first or developer first organization. We are tracking this process and drop off from page visit, which is a developer initially discovering your API, whether that's landing on a blog page, it could be some documentation, it could be your own landing pages or your homepage. And then we're seeing what is the conversion rate to sign up, right? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 20%? How many of those folks sign up? But then for a lot of API products, you're going to see a lot of folks who don't ever end up sending traffic through the API. They sign up and they're actually not a developer. They can't do anything, right? And so tracking that rate of sign up to first hello world, that's probably one of the most fundamental metrics for any API first product, right? And so what we're tracking here is both the percentage, the conversion rate, right? What percentage of signups end up sending their first API call, right? Whether that's through Postman or Curl or maybe another tool. And then how long does it take? Is it 15 minutes? Or is this like a, 20 hours because they need a bunch of other things before they can even start testing it? And if it is 20 hours to make that first API call, then maybe there's some things you can do, such as making sure they have very clear and concise examples, documentation, tutorials, videos, copy paste API keys. There's a lot of things you can do to shorten that time. There's another metric that's equally important, which is what we call time to first working app. Some companies might call this time to revenue service or time to a full deployment. And what we're tracking here is how long does it take for a developer to go from making that first API call, which again might be just through Postman or just some test traffic, to actually having a full working solution with your API. And that's rolled out to production. And that could be in the hundreds of thousands of API calls, and they might be using different APIs, maybe it's 5 different APIs put together. And so tracking that also allows you to understand, how many folks, they gave a little bit of effort, through Postman to test the API, but were they actually able to build out a full working solution and get that deployed? And so these are the two things we recommend: tracking conversion rate and how long does it take to reach that next step. But also the tricky thing here is there's a lot of different developer personas. Some folks are going to sign up with their Gmail account. Some folks are going to sign up with their work email address. You're going to have different channels that they discover the API through. Maybe it's through paid ads. Maybe it's through a blog post. Maybe it's through efforts from the sales org. You're also going to have different experience levels. You're going to have senior developers and engineering
Derek,
managers.
So, sorry, Derek. So it's almost time. So, do you have maybe a few 10-second wrap for your talk, so that we can also let the audience to follow up some question offline with you? Yeah.
Sure. On here, the key takeaway is deliver a great self-service developer experience.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for interrupt. So because the time is almost running out, so you share some of the patterns to talk about the API monetization. So if any audience is interested in that, so feel free to reach out Derek or reach out to API Days team. Okay, so thanks for your support again, Derek. So see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so here come to our next sections. So we have Simon, the founder and CEO from Tesobi. So he will be sharing about the API-driven banking beyond Open API. So he is also supporting API Days Hong Kong for a few years. So thanks again for your support. So Simon, okay, can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm here. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah. Loud and clear as well.
You can see my screen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So look, I'm starting my stopwatch. You can see my stopwatch.
So I pass the time to you. So thanks.
Okay. Hey, cool. Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone at the API Days team, API Days Hong Kong, for having me. So yeah, I'm Simon Redfern. I'm CEO of Tesobi and founder of the Open Bank project. We started this whole open banking thing back in 2010. I'm a software developer, and we've been building on the Open Bank project, open source platform for banks and fintechs and financial institutions since 2011. So today I'm going to talk about APIs that perhaps go a little broader than the kind of what is now known as the open banking kind of scope of APIs. In fact, I always envisaged open banking. Of course, it started with this kind of like access to accounts and transactions and so on. But actually, from day one, we built the Open Bank project technology to be totally API driven and API first. It's no surprise that our technology is totally API driven. But in the just to set some context, so open banking, started in Europe. UK was the first country to get their PSD2 compliant APIs out to the public, and it started with banks' open data, such as branches, ATMs, and customers' own data, such as accounts and transactions, and obviously access to payments and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of definition of open banking. Some people say that open finance goes beyond that, but this is all, in a sense, this is all semantics, right? But obviously there's a whole set of APIs which are not related to customer data. They're not related to kind of public banking data, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So some people might say, well, but we're already using APIs, right? We've got account information APIs and some of the APIs that I mentioned, but we can definitely add premium APIs. I mean, the regulators say that banks have to give their regulated APIs for free, right? So at least up to a certain kind of daily usage and all that kind of stuff. But we can add APIs which are doing other tasks such as KYC, know your customer, anti-money laundering, that kind of stuff. We can add actually more frequent APIs for account information and so on. And then we can do things like bank-specific things like doing account creation and so on, and user onboarding, right? So actually bringing a user onto the API platform itself can be done with APIs. And then we can have many APIs which are internal, right? So APIs to do with API monitoring and limiting, and APIs just to get like what we call fire hose views onto accounts. So bank tellers, they want to have views onto data. So similar shaped APIs to the open banking, but just much larger quantities of data. So here we see that mandated APIs are obviously big in Europe, but the non-mandated APIs are growing pretty quickly. So you can see examples here from Nordea and ING. Nordea, nice graphics there. You can see the compliance APIs, but then the premium APIs, and developers and TPPs can pay for those, right? So yeah, some other examples. So we can provide APIs for credit scoring, FX, that kind of thing. And internal APIs. So, we in Open Bank Project, we have APIs for creating APIs, which is a little bit chicken and egg situation, but dynamically you can create the APIs by making post requests. And then you can tag the APIs and so on and so forth. All our documentation comes through APIs. So we have an endpoint called resource docs, and this returns the documentation of the APIs in two formats. One is Swagger, and another is something which is peculiar to Open Bank Project, which is we call resource docs. And there we actually have, like, for instance, the names of the Scala functions which surface the APIs and so on and so forth. So the advantage of that is that any tools can see this documentation in real time. So I mean, I'm probably speaking to preaching to the converted, but obviously the main benefits of becoming API driven is that you you decouple applications, right? So you have one application which does something really cool, and if you surface an interface, then you can refactor the internals of that that application. You can make it faster, more efficient. You can clean up the code, but the interface remains stable, right? This is a main thing. And if you create premium APIs, right, your organization can differentiate yourself from another organization, say another bank in this similar market, and you can encourage niche applications to be developed, which is good for your customers in the end, right? And you can, by exposing, I mean, just think of how much data you've got in your organization or your bank. By exposing some of this data to the right partners, you can potentially monetize that data. And I think if you have APIs, then you automatically, or potentially automatically anyway, provide like good single points of truth with you know, good up-to-date documentation, like so that's good for the different business units within your organization. They know where to get data and services. So one example, for instance, API-driven billing. So obviously, this is not related to the regulated open banking APIs, but we have APIs for getting the metrics from the APIs. So how many API calls are made by which consumer, and so on and so forth. And then we also have APIs for setting rate limiting, right, or enabling and disabling consumers. And if you plug that into your accounting system, right, we use a open source accounting system called Invoice Ninja, but of course, you know, a bank or a financial institution could plug in these APIs to any accounting system that they want to use. You plug those together, and suddenly you have a billing system, right? So if the invoices by the TPP are by the third-party provider, if they're not paid, then you can rate limit the APIs, or you know, or even like switch off the consumer completely. But you've got fine-grained access control. Actually, the previous speaker was talking about different ways to bill APIs, and I'm going to check that out properly later, because I think that's good points in that talk. Other APIs, other functionality. So we have APIs to tag your endpoints, actually. So get and set tags. We're working with a large bank, and they are using, and we haven't done a public press release yet, so I've just blanked out the name, but happy to be working with them. And they're using Figma, which is like a prototype development tool, and a good tool for producing web apps and so on. So they are able to get all their APIs into these into Figma to use data, and even to get this it's possible to select APIs and like filter APIs that you want to use from a third-party tool such as Figma, right? So you don't have to be using the Open Bank Project API portal or API Explorer, which, by the way, is fully driven by APIs, right? So there's no copy and paste of Swagger files or anything like that. It's all real-time over APIs. So other APIs that we have is APIs for creating dynamic entities, which automatically create CRUD endpoints for adding new types of data. And as I mentioned earlier, you can create APIs using APIs, and you can also on the right here, you can add them to API collections, right? So if you have hundreds and hundreds of APIs, then you probably want to be able to group them. You can group them via tags, but you can also explicitly put them into collections and give them give certain people or certain groups of people access to these collections. Another use of APIs is collecting device data, actually. So this is a rather crowded screenshot, so I'll just let your eyes rest on it for a second. But it's in the background. It's showing a web app that we have called SOFIT, which was used recently by a large credit scoring company and an NGO in Italy called Microfinanza. And we used this app, which is using the Open Bank project, kind of standard APIs for getting accounts and transactions, but also APIs for adding tags and so on to transactions. And then our partner wanted to get data from the phone, following user consent, of course, but say like battery level, number of contacts, this kind of stuff, to build up a kind of credit score. And so we were able to put APIs into the phone SDK. It's the what's the name of it? It's the update from PhoneGap. Actually, it's not called PhoneGap anymore, but the same technology. And we're able to marry the kind of data, so correlate the data coming from the web app, so there's a hosted web app and the phone, and link those together. And that's all done via APIs. Via these kind of create user attributes for each user. So a very flexible way of creating data, so we don't have to hard code like attributes like battery level or something like that. We can the developer can store key value pairs, basically. So like a kind of what's the word? The word escapes me. But you could use a kind of standard way to name these attributes and then provide documentation for them. So it's pretty flexible. So this is just showing some of the Open Bank project data model. And all that stuff is exposed via APIs. So actually, even configuration of our portal and so on and so forth, and translation of the portal and translation of documentation, actually. So we've recently been working with a large bank in Mexico on a regulatory API project, and actually we translated all our suite of applications, and part of that is providing the documentation in Spanish, right? So you're able to submit translations of APIs over the API, and that's a little bit work in progress, actually, but maybe at another API Days talk, I can give a talk about that translation topics. Okay, so let's see how many minutes I've got. My phone keeps on going off. Okay, I'm at 16 minutes, so doing good. So how can my bank become, well, I would say, API driven or more API driven? Well, and obviously this relates to any organization, but eat your own dog food, right? So and this will encourage you to have more APIs. Realize that pretty much everything can be API or interface driven. So I think a previous talk from IBM, they were mentioning Kafka. So we support Kafka as well, actually, in Open Bank project. So we have interfaces, REST interfaces at the front and the back, but also interfaces to things like Kafka. And then just realize, look, all this type of data. So you've got regulated bank data, like ATM branches, regulated customer data, like accounts and transactions, balances, payments, so on and so forth. But then just think about all the non-regulated bank data that you have, like what might be useful, what could you monetize, what could people build apps on, and then non-regulated customer data, internal process, external processes that could benefit from APIs. So many, and then if that's not enough, then you can use this kind of reverse brainstorming technique, which is just, what API would I never have, like a red card, and then, I don't know, come up with that, whatever the answer to that question is, and then reverse it, and you'll find yourself with some interesting APIs. Oh wow, that's fast. I was fast. I don't know if that's too fast, but I would be happy to take questions. By the way, you can look at this. We have a sandbox online, API sandbox.openbankproject.com. So if you want to have a play around, you can register for free there, and we definitely won't spam you. You can have a look. There's some like dummy transaction data if you want to use it. And by the way, this is our like a kind of functional overview, just showing how the different layers of our Open Bank project technology, showing how you can split the modules as they are. You can either run them monolithically, or you can run them on many different nodes. And we support Kubernetes and Red Hat OpenShift. And I mentioned these interfaces at the bottom for interfaces to other like protocols like Kafka, Akka, databases, and so on and so forth. So in one buzzword, interfaces all the way around, as I think someone said to Bertrand Russell once, it's turtles all the way down, and we have interfaces all the way around. Yes.
Okay.
Questions?
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Simon. So, you share about the Open Bank project, and honestly, I also tried it previously, and it's very comprehensive, and I can see there's something also in new development as well. So, maybe some quick question. Maybe that's what I understand from the local Hong Kong community. So, you mentioned about doing the API banking, but most of the problem nowadays is that maybe their core banking system may not be fully ready, and then they need to do quite a lot of work to see what data they need to expose, etc. So may I know how the Open Bank project's positioning? Is this like a sandbox or POC so that they can taste it, or is it actually a production ready thing that they can use?
Yeah, so it's definitely both, right? So we often start our kind of journey with a bank from a sandbox point of view, but more and more we also start from like diving into production straight away. So, for instance, the bank I mentioned in Mexico, the priority is the production APIs, but we also provide APIs on a sandbox as well. And it's basically the same technology, but obviously in a different configuration. So in a sandbox mode, we all the data is here basically so we read and write to the Open Bank project database. And actually, but also in production mode, we sometimes store some data in Open Bank project database, right? So actually the distinction between, for us, the distinction between sandbox and production is, I mean, obviously the use is different, right? But the lines are blurring a bit, because sometimes people have a sandbox and then they want to start introducing real data into it, you know, and then obviously we might run some more nodes and so on and so forth, and treat access a bit differently. But basically, it's the same technology. So, you know, Open Bank project with a bit of Nginx in front for SSL termination, and we're doing all the JWS validation, MTLS validation, etc., etc. So it's a production and compliance ready platform, but you can put it into sandbox mode. And when you put it into sandbox mode, then that's a lot easier for developers to get started, right? Because they don't have to jump through the MTLS hoops and maybe OAuth 2 with PKCE and all this kind of stuff. They can use like simpler authentication methods to get started, right? So.
Okay, got that. Yeah.
Yeah, but the APIs are the same, right? So that's the great thing. So when they start using the production version, then it's the same APIs, just with extra authentication on top.
Yeah. Because from our understanding, the API mainly the channel part. So there's always a lot of challenge talking about the backend system, core system. So there still needs some effort to integrate those things. So that's my understanding.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you know, sometimes it can take months just to get VPN access into a bank, or to or to find some documentation, and then finding the right people who knows where the data is, right? So yeah, it's a long process for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Simon, for sharing. So if anyone interested in the Open Bank project, feel free to reach out Simon and then see the projects. Actually, this is quite self-serve. I also tried to pay a bit before. So once again,
fantastic.
Thanks, Simon.
Hey, most welcome, and happy days, everybody. Yeah, happy days.
Okay, thanks.
Ciao.
Okay.
Bye. Happy API days.
Bye-bye. Okay,
Bye.
yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so thanks, Simon. So he's come to the last sections of the day. So the last section will be concluded by myself. So I will try to share about what is talking about the open banking is a how, and embedded finance is a why. Why I come to this topic, actually it's pretty much also some observation from us, from the community in the past 3 years. So I have been working in the Hong Kong API community for quite a while, and then we talk to a lot of banks, enterprise, working with some partners, TSP, etc. And then we can see there's some gaps there, and also maybe the understanding of open banking is quite different. So we have been in the I would say we are a lot of fintech company or fintech team. We would say we are tech fin. So we provide the technologies to help the parties to easier to integrate together from the operation perspective, from the cultural perspective. So this is really feeling strong. And then 3 months ago, I actually take time off, and then I try to do a study in UK with executive education, talking about the open banking. So this is also what I learned from the regional experts, and this is the key takeaway. So open banking is actually a tool for how, and then the actual meaningful thing is talk about the open finance or the embedded finance. Hopes that the next 20 minutes I can also help to share some foundation about this. And I'm not going to steal the spotlight from our day one speaker. They are really experienced in the banking field, and then I would like to share something in the middle. Okay. So let me try to pick the control. Okay, so maybe back to the original part. So why open banking? So we heard about the open banking in Hong Kong 3 years ago, and we all think it is a good thing. And then some developers believe that they can do some application on top of banking services, etc. But what is the history? So I want to maybe share a bit on the background here. So it is basically built from a vision of the modern banking. It's talking about the traditional bank is more as a closed model. So the data is there, and then you may not know what is happening. But okay, they may need to collaborate due to the different kind of factors or reasons I will share in the next slide. And then there's also another emphasis is talking about the control of the data from the consumer's perspective. So we do a lot of things in the bank, but can we leverage the historical data and then maybe authorize the other people to have a better service? There's also some increasing discussion. Is the consumer deserve a better experience with the control of the data? And also, there's also the third point is there should also be a discussion talk about the shift of the control. Talk about first who is the owner of the data. Okay, so this three initiative actually inspire. Okay, so we do something like the open banking. Okay, there are also another trend that is happening. It is not new in the past few years. It's the rise of fintech. There's a lot of fintech companies try to do a lot of things very innovative in a specific domain. And then, this is mainly due to the context is starting to have differences. In our past days, we need to go to the bank, need to use the phone to call the services. But with the smartphone, actually, we can do it everywhere. And then with the evolution of the phone, it is now more and more convenience as well. So it provides a better engagement and in different contexts. And whether those fintech can also try to leverage some data for a better service. So how can they maybe acquire the data on behalf of the customer? So this is something that is happened even before the open banking. Okay, so do you have a question talking about how the fintech collect data before the open API? So if you are some technical person, there should be a term that you are not you should be familiar. So it's talking about the screen scraping. So in the old days, we may program, maybe using Python, go to a website to grab some data here and then make it structural so that we can use it for another angle. Okay, so this is also happening previously. So before the Open API standard, or even nowadays, not every region is having the open banking push or regulations. It is still quite popular for some of the fintechs is using the screen scraping technologies. But this is also some problem. It's actually pushing the user at risk because they don't know what the data will be used, whether the data is correct or not. If you are using this kind of data to make decision, who will be the responsible for that, and what is the liability? So this is before the open banking or open API framework things. So this create a tension between the fintech company and also the banks. So fintechs, they always want to look for data in innovative way, maybe full screen scraping, log in on behalf of the others, but maybe they are not having the complete regulations or full process to protect the consumer. While the bank in two perspective, one, of course, they need to protect the client. If there's any issues, it's maybe their liability and responsibility. And also, this kind of actions potentially is actually grabbing the pike. So they are actually trying to grab the client, maybe steal some of the existing process or service, etc. So this actually create a discussion, whether we should set something up together so that it can work smoothly. So the open banking actually define the how. So how we need to acquire the data from a bank in what kind of process. For example, you may heard about the TSP, the third party first service party registration, etc., or even the certifications. So this is talking about how they need to acquire the data with what kind of background, and also define what is the basic API that at least needs to be open up from the bank. So if you are familiar with the open banking phase that I posed, so the following diagram is not something really new. So at this moment, Hong Kong is already in the phase 3 implementations. So you can see that okay, the product information, the maybe the basic customer application like the credit card applications is already ready, and then talking about the account information assets is now in process. Some of the bank is already fulfilled that in the retail perspective. For the SME is in progress, but if you have a chance to talk to some of the fintech or even from the bank, we also have a discussion, okay, whether it is really enough for the fintech or for some useful use cases. So why we are saying so? Because the data is there, but if we need to do the regulations and next certain data can be exposed for API, it needs to have a very long process to check the risk, etc. And then when we come to the actual use cases, whether we think it is something that make revenue, or it is maybe a campaign project or some risk project, etc. The intention will be very different. If you are working in an enterprise, you will know, okay, who is the sponsor. If the sponsor is actually seeing the value behind, they will be very supportive. But this is a project that maybe putting them in a risk, maybe losing a business, maybe creating overhead, then it's very normal that people will receive back. But it is quite interestingly, when we are working in the community in the past few years, we do hearing some interesting stories. Is that, oh, actually the bank has a lot of hidden variables, maybe hidden genes behind. So they actually have more APIs than you think. But this is the but it may not be defined in the Open API framework. So what is the problem? The problem is why I need to open up to you. So back to the original statement of the topic here. So the open banking actually define the basic way how we can exchange the data, etc. But this is still the problem. Why we need to do open banking? What is the benefit? So I want to take the talk here to share about some of our common experience. Okay, when there's a bank want to look for TSP, when a TSP want to look at a bank, it's always like a matching. So why? The bank will be valuable to the TSP, or on the other hand, why the TSP is valuable to the bank. So we need to justify that. Just like in day one, we have chance to listen to some executive from banks, from virtual banks, etc. You can see that they are actually doing something very interesting. And especially in day one, we heard about a concept called your brand, our networks. They are willing to share the network, especially if you can help them to make new business. Okay, so the why we will say about is talking about the embedded finance context. So how actually you can fill the gap that maybe the bank cannot be effectively fulfilled at this moment. So if you can address this kind of problem, I can see most of the bank is very open to do the discussion. Of course, the next step will be, okay, you have the context. How can you resolve the technical operation or cultural concern? And then this is the part that my team is actually helping on to lower the barrier, etc. But the more important thing is the context. Okay, so what exactly is the embedded or open finance? So actually Simon's talk also mentioned a bit, okay, the open API, and then the next step is we heard about open finance, but what exactly it is? So I am going to share a bit on that one as well. So I extract this one from the website, the openbankingeurope.eu. So this open finance is not like open banking, is not very well defined. So I can see a lot of different interpretation, but this one is quite reasonable, I can say. This is like open finance is like a shorthand, means which is talking about the open banking activity go beyond the current regulatory scope. Okay, so in the Europe, it's talking about the PSD2, but in Hong Kong, we are having the Open API framework. So this is some activity, let's say some similar foundations, cultural, through the API for different collaboration, but it is more talking about the market driven. Okay, so we will describe the open finance is like the continuity of the open banking, which is like the next step. Is this the technical next step? Is a lot because the open banking, as we can see in the past 3 years, it allow a lot of awareness, openness, or cultural education. People start to shape their thinking a bit. So open finance, we can say it is an evolution from different kind of perspective, not only from the technical perspective, from the mindset, etc. And then what it focuses is the actual financial journey with different embedded context. In Chinese, we heard about it before, talk about the 場景金融. So this is how we inject specific context in a right time, right moment. And then with that kind of open finance collaborations, the TSP or the business can help to access some relevant data so that they can have a better, more scalable, more contextual leads to help the actually consumer. And then what we can see, open finance is not yet regulated. So it's the low regulation at this moment, but in the future, we don't know. But in many different regions, we still say it's not yet regulated. Okay, so I talking about the open finance so that you are now open to different opportunity. But the problem is, okay, how we can embed different contexts. Then this is talking about the embedded finance. So in this graphics, we can say if once we do the open banking, we blend the assets and data, so you can check the data. For example, in the open banking phase 3, you can check the account information or whether the account is active. So you check that. But if what is the meaning? Okay, I can check the balance, but what else? For example, I know that I have a certain amount of balance, but what is the next step? It is without the actual contextual scenario and also the motivation for the next step for the team to support that. Well, with the open finance, you can see that there's a lot of different kind of scenario that is surrounding. For example, the payroll, whether we can do some automatically payroll, we don't need to have a account team to do the manual upload of the Excel, etc. Can we do some maybe the automatical loan? For example, when we want to buy a car, can we buy the car insurance immediately with a discount? So this kind of thing is talking about the embedded finance. Okay, so there's a few type of embedded finance situation that we can sum up. One I mentioned is talking about the payment. So payment part is not something new. So maybe okay, you say what's the differences? Talking about the credit card, I think this is very similar. The now with the bank to I would say the account to account payment like the FPS. So it actually help a lot talking about the removing the intermediate fee, etc. So it enable, for example, we also have some cases how to enable some FPS payment collection in some e-commerce solution, which may not be in the platform, but enable the developer to collect money easier. So this is also the embedded payment. The embedded banking services, maybe the exact banking services will not be happening in the internet banking or mobile banking, but actually embed into other maybe accounting system or ERP system. So this is something that they can, you don't need to go to a specific login. And one of the pain point we heard, and I feel as well, is that the traditional internet banking, the account may be tied to the founder or director or board. So, but you really difficult to delegate to the other team to help you to manage. Okay, for example, when my secretary need to log in my bank, they always need to call me. Okay, what is the second factor of and password, etc. It's really troublesome, and this is also risky as well. Okay, so you can see that we have listed out a bit of the embedded finance example, like embedded investment, lending, the insurance I mentioned about. Okay, I buy the car, can we actually get the car insurance immediately? And you can actually emergent, you can embed a lot of things. Just like Simon also mentioned, if the bank, they enable a lot of different kind of API, the API may not need to be a banking service, maybe different kind of thing. So talking about the open banking, this is the first step to inject the concept. So we start with a few API or data, but what we can expect is, once we can get the foundation and culture running smoothly, there's a lot can be happening beyond the traditional banking context. Okay, so we also know that there's a different kind of perspective, especially compared. I think Hong Kong is quite special somehow. So we are actually always sitting between the East and West. We have both culture, we have both experience. So we have the WeChat. We also using WhatsApp, Facebook. So we can see in the Europe and US how they do the embedded finance is very different from the China way. Okay, as you can see in this slide, so different kind of context, they are quite separate. We said it's unbundled. There's no super app doing everything. So they have an app, they finish a specific operation, and then they will integrate and pass the data to the other part. So there's a lot of specialized softwares that you may assemble your entire business, like what you can see in the screen. While we can see in China, we will have something like the Mega App. So they actually serve as a container, and then they inject and using the ecosystem within the super app. For example, I have a project actually working with a university. They use the software called Ding Ding, and then they use it to manage orders, maybe CRM, the payment, finance, etc. And then with the we call the mini app, the 小程序 to solve that. So they are doing it in very different kind of perspective to implement the embedded finance. Okay, there's quite some example we can see now is happening also in Hong Kong, talking about the embedded finance. There's quite some implementation, especially with the CVS program. We do the online shopping. We can see there's a lot of new payment options. For example, the buy now pay later. I've also tried it. So as a layman user, you actually don't feel any difference. Unlike the old day, you need to do a lot of poses talking about the different multiple installment. And then talking about the point of sales lending, maybe, okay, when you are doing some purchase online, they will pop you whether you want to have some specific service. So this is based on your behavior. And I'm not repeating the insurance part, but the fintech as a service is another angle. It is not from the bank, but from the other fintech, like maybe the invoicing, the accounting software, how they can embed to your daily workflow involving the bank's operation. We do also have a experience use case that we can quickly share in the later of this slide. So okay, I basically talk about the open banking. This is the how and the embedded context. Again, what we are trying to do and our team expertise is mainly on the enriching the community, so that we are very lucky that we have a lot of fans and speakers supporting the event. So we see in the past few years, we see some common challenges in the ecosystem. For example, when we talk about the open finance, it's always involved cross-sector cultural. For example, we have experience working with a bank and education technologies. Maybe education firm may not understand what is API. They need some gap or bridge to explain them. And maybe, okay, in the tourism, they need to interact with the insurance. They may not to have the exact language and technologies. For example, in the tourism, they may not have a big IT team. So we can see a lot of gap there, including, for example, a lot with their suitable skill. They may not also have the, without a track record, we do also see that talking about the open banking collaborations, they are hesitate to invest a lot of upfront investment. Maybe in this 1 or 2 days, you heard a lot of technology thing. Okay, we can have a data platform, we can have API gateway. But what I understand in the early stage, those companies may not have the luxury to invest a bit and cannot justify internally. Maybe the initial dollar side, they don't know how much is it. And of course, they need to prove some of the work quicker through the quicker time to market. So our company, what we are doing is we are helping to do some strategy, and then we have a ready-made platform called Open API Hub, and we have a community. Like today, some of our community members is also joining, and also with a connector platform called Fiber Connect, so that the fintech or the bank or enterprise, they don't need to rebuild their own, and then they can do the POC connection very quickly. So this is basically how we are doing nowadays. This is one example that we are helping bank to do the embedded payment and payment collections. So for example, nowadays beside the wallet, we do also have the FPS QR code collections, but not every company have their own IT team to build their online platform. So we actually help to do the connectors with our platform. So some company maybe with only 1 or 2 people, they just subscribe the connector so that they can use the embedded payment module in their website, their e-commerce system, or their education tutor fee collection system. So this is how we try to bridge the gap and then lower the barrier that the TSP don't need to require a high investment, often investment on the team, etc. So this is some connector we are always supporting, like Zero, WooCommerce, OpenCard, even Calendly. I think some of you are already using Calendly to book your meetings, but some of you may use Calendly to book consulting sessions. So why don't we just collect the money at that time? So this is a very simple example on the embedded payment. Okay, so last year we also worked with DSPS and Zero to launch the first FPS payment plugin. And I would also very proud to share, we are also working with the ecosystem quite closely. So our Open API platform also working with Science Park to empower their next generation Open API hub platform so that they can help to collaborate their staff and the fintech partner through our platform so that they don't need to spend a lot of effort, time to build their infrastructure as well. And previously, we also helped one of the banks to do an open banking innovation program called API Eco Booster. So I saw the time is almost up. So I would say if you are interested to make more connections and then how to form better collaboration, feel free to reach us out. And also we are doing a lot of different API community events as well. So just keep in touch, let us know, and then we will also do some webinar workshop in next few months with different partners. Okay, so see whether we have some question. I think the time is almost up. Okay, there's one question. Maybe I quickly answer that one. So there's people asking. So open finance, is it said to be include open health? So if you try to look into that topic, we will set the next step. The open finance will set open data. So this is a bigger vision. Maybe let's recall the one of the talk in day one. We do have the telco data as well. So it is talking about a broader view. Talk about the open finance, how we can leverage the data to better improve our life. And then, for example, in Australia, they are also having the data initiative, how talking about beyond the open banking. So I have a lot to share and exchange. So feel free to talk to me if you are interested. So maybe I will try to spend the time to do the closure of the event. Okay, so let me switch the slide here. Once again, thanks everyone joining the API Days Hong Kong. And let me share my closure slide. Wait a minute. Okay, so okay. So thanks everyone for your support for the day one and day two. So we conclude our day one section, day two section today, and hopefully you enjoy the 40+ sections we line up. So we cover a lot of things from the industry, from the API product side, from the telco perspective. So we do just a quick recap. So we have 2-day sections. We have more than 1,000 audience joining our event. And then last but not least, we really want to thank for our speakers. As you are aware, some of them is from local, they are very senior, they are very busy, especially today is a typhoon day. We also thanks for the Hong Kong speaker, they split the time to support that. And then we also line up the regional speaker from different regions to share about their experience, maybe from, for example, UK, US, how we can learn it together. So we thanks for our speaker lineup. And then last but not least, still we need to thank for our global sponsor, our sponsor, co-sponsor conference. Without them, we cannot make the event in this scale. And then we also want to thanks for our speaker, our sponsor, Apidays and NewYork. They also provide a very solid support to us. And we are also working with our community partner like Hong Kong Computer Society, the Hong Kong Science Park Staff Association, Open API Community, etc. So as I said, we are doing the annual API Days conference here, and then we are now discussing having some monthly smaller event, maybe co-store. We hear your voice. We want to make it more engaging, so just stay tuned to our e-newsletter. Okay, so this is the last chance for you to do the treasure hunt. So just spend maybe 5 minutes to go there and then see that when you are lucky enough to earn your 4,000 Hong Kong dollars gift card. Okay, so I really like this graphic. The team actually compiled that last night. Hopefully, we can still see you next year. And then even though no matter the weather is good or bad, hopefully we can see you next year again. Okay, so everyone, please stay healthy, stay safe, and happy API Days. So see you soon in next year. Thank you.